Ay, 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 what is going on? Dang it. Never heard of them. You have no idea what you're talking about. So there it is. After I posted my last episode, the 1982 albums that I did with Jerry, we both got a text from our friend Brian Spencer from high school. Shout out to Brian. He had a great idea that the Anthony Wherley's podcast needed some kind of intro or a theme song, and that ideas were thrown around. Many of them, unfortunately, I probably couldn't have pulled off because of copyright issues, but I did throw that together. I worked on it over the weekend, got some daily quotes or frequent quotes from me in there, things that if I'm around you on a daily basis or a regular basis, you've probably heard me say those things. Especially the last one is specifically to the two guys that I spend a lot of my last hours of the school day, at least for a little bit longer. That line gets said to them a lot. So that also gives me a new intro so that I don't always have to say, welcome back, because that sounds goofy. So today's episode is going to fall underneath the category. I've said before that I was going to talk coaching and going to talk music and maybe sports and life stuff. And I'm on my own today, and one of the things under the life category would be things that I've experienced. And 9 years ago today, I lost my dad. His health hadn't been well for a handful of years prior to that. He definitely hadn't been doing well that week, if I remember right, 9 years ago. April 8th was on a Wednesday. He hadn't been doing well at all and was in the hospital in Macomb. And we had spent the majority of the day over there in Macomb with him. And unfortunately, he passed in, I've said it many times, around 2015, maybe less recently, that was the worst year of my life. And he passed away in it. And it wasn't at the time, I would say it was the worst year of my life, not because he passed away, but because of other things that went along. And that was just the cherry on top of what would be an awful year. Down the road, and I'm going to use the word clarity a lot in this this episode, because I think clarity is the thing I'm probably find more and more the older I get. I was being a baby when I talked about that being the worst year of my life, because I really believe that, and I say this to people who can handle it, and I say it to myself as I walk away from people who I don't know if they can, but I'm sure if we pushed all of our problems into the center of a table that was surrounded by people, there's a lot of people that would grab quickly the problems that I had. In my mind, as an educator, as a person who's worked in a school district, and I'm sure my friends who are educators would, maybe some of them would agree with me, that we don't look at a year being January 1st to December 31st. We look at a year as being from the end of August until the end of May, depending on when school gets started and when it gets out. And, because we are all spoiled and get 3 months off in the summer. They're not spoiled. Educators aren't spoiled. Teachers aren't spoiled. If you're listening to this, they need that time to recharge their batteries for the job that they do. This is kind of a side note. They need to recharge those batteries. And I would say, having grown up in, obviously gone to school as a kid and then been an educator, they need those 3 months now more than they ever had, because the job is harder than it's ever been. Anyway, there's a tangent for you. I don't get the summers off entirely, but a school year is how I base my year. And in April of 2015 is when on the 8th, it was when my dad passed away. And it was coming up on the end of a year where I was the dean of students. And that was an awful decision by me that I had almost a calendar year earlier had agreed to do. It wasn't something I ever wanted to do. I never wanted to be an administrator. I never had an ounce of desire to run a school or to be a disciplinarian or do any of those things. Because one of my favorite things is the people who think they know what they would do if they were the boss. They love to say what they would do if they were the boss, but they ain't the boss, and they're not willing to do what it takes to be the boss. They just like to say what they would do if they were that person. And I, in my own time as a teacher, educator, as whatever, I've never been that person. I don't always agree with every decision that's made, but I also know for a fact that I don't want to be the one making it. So when I did decide to do that job and was miserable doing it, did not enjoy it, I had made it through the year to April, and then I lose my dad. And I look back on that time period in that situation that I knew early on in that job that I didn't want to do it. And I was trudging my way through it. And I remember getting to April and, you're like 2 months out. I'm like, I'm almost there. And it was almost comical in a way. The word is escaping me now, but it was just, of course it happens then. Of course it happens in this year that I feel like, and I've allowed myself to feel sorry for, myself, and it would only be fitting that I would lose one of the two most influential people in my life as I'm getting close to the end of that. And I will say this, I did a pretty good job, I think, of not letting it didn't bother me as much as it might have bothered me because of what I had spent the last year, what I had been spending that year doing. And I don't know if I instantly had that perspective, but when I look back now, and as I look back leading up to the visitation into the funeral, I remember thinking about how I was 44 years old. I lost my hero, yet I was working with kids every day who many of them or some of them would have given anything to have had a dad like my dad for 4 years, for 4 days, for 4 weeks, whatever. So how could I be too completely sad or destroyed because I was blessed to have a person who raised me to be the person that I am today, or helped with his wife raise me to be the person that I am today? How could I be that totally destroyed because I was blessed to have had the best in my life? And the funny thing is like, even that person who was 44 and being a baby about this job, I still hadn't completely learned the lessons that he had been trying to teach me. And, as I've honestly started to record this thing like 6 different times, and I've stopped and deleted it each time because I didn't like it. But in each of the times I've talked about how when I was a kid, I wasn't the person that I am today. I never had a great work ethic. I never took a lot of pride in what I was doing. I did just enough to get by. I didn't know it, especially in junior high. I didn't treat other people right. I wasn't very nice. I could be, but I wasn't all the time. And I remember, and if you grew up with me, you probably know what I'm talking about. And maybe you were someone that I wasn't nice to. And I've not forgotten that I could be that way. And my parents didn't raise me to act like that. They never acted like that. So I look back, at that time, 9 years ago, there was all these things going through my head. And I finally had come to a point where I had a good work ethic, and I've, give Illini Central everything that I have, and I try really hard during the coaching, whether when I'm coaching, whether I am or whether I'm not, or whether I was or whether I wasn't a good coach at the time. I don't know, but all of that came to was playing into my mind. I remember 9 years ago, and how thankful I was that that person that raised me, one of the two people who raised me, put me in a position where my perspective was so clear at that time that I was able to get through that year, a difficult year, because I was raised by someone who you just put your head down and go. You just do the best that you possibly can. And you don't feel sorry for yourself and dwell on different things. And that's kind of what I spent my time doing around that loss of this, special person to me who helped make me who I was. And even though I'm sure, and I've said this many times, I think I've actually written it too. I know I've said it to friends. I'm sure there were times my dad laid in bed and looked over at my mom and said, is this kid ever going to figure it out? Is he ever going to get it? And because I would have been laying there, and this kid is the laziest ding dong. Ding dong is the term that I like to use to describe people who can't figure things out. Whether a ding dong is 10 years old or 20 years old or 30 years old or 40 years old, 50, 60, 70, there's all kinds of ding dongs. It's not a kid thing. Some people never figure it out. And I'm sure there were times he wondered if I would ever figure it out. And thankfully I did before he was gone, so he could see that I did figure it out, and I was paying attention, and I did learn from him. I'm glad that he was able to see it in me before he wasn't around anymore. And I'm glad that he got to see that in my sister too. One of the rough things about 9 years ago is today's my sister's birthday, and to have my dad pass away on her birthday is rough as well. And I know he was able to see her become the person she has become, and the impact that she has on students, whether it was at Western or now. I know he's still able to see the things that she's doing and the difference that she's making. And she and I took a picture together. I think it was last fall. It was probably around my mom's birthday. And when I looked at that picture, all I could see was our dad, and how proud our dad was, and how I know our dad is of the both of us, for the lives that the paths that we've chosen, and our ability to, help students and help kids. And even though it's hard and it's difficult at times to be a coach and to be a teacher or to be in charge of a school play or whatever, you just keep battling, because in the end that what you're doing is making a difference. And I think that again is why that year is so interesting, because I'll still catch myself saying it. That was the worst year of my life. It was a miserable job. I didn't like it at all. And it got to me to the point that there were times that I would allow it to get me. I remember pulling up to Illini Central one time that year. It would have been before April, where I literally sat in my truck. I'm like, man, I don't want to get out of this truck. I don't want to go in there. It was the only time in my life that I can ever remember that I didn't want to go into that building, or I didn't want to go in an Illini Central building, or an Illini Central building, and do my job. And, there were multiple times throughout that year that it affected the way I treated people, because I would feel sorry for myself. And I'm so glad that I have the perspective looking back. And I even did in the moment that I was making more out of it. I was allowing it to get to me when it wasn't that bad. Just keep going. And, my family watched my dad do that through illness over those handful of years. Like I said, before he passed, just kept fighting, didn't give in. And it was a lot worse than being the dean of students, what he was going through. And I I think back to that year, 9 years down the road, and how much of an influence he had on me that I didn't even know that it was influencing me, but I look back and know now that it was. My health, I had back issues that year. I had other, minor health things, but my back was bad towards the end of that school year, and it maybe earlier on too. And I remember, it was funny, I was thinking about it the other day. Coach Gensel was doing hockey and PE, and I stole a PE hockey stick and was using it to like lean on when had to stand, whether it was in the lunchroom or whether it was where I stood before school, to make sure kids were getting to where they were supposed to go and not misbehaving. And it would have been really easy to like take days off. Like, you already don't like what you're doing and don't want to go and do it. And you don't feel well either. And you can't stand up very well and your back is killing you. So you could have easily just said, I'm not going. And I did anyway. And it's not a coincidence why I wasn't doing it because I'm tough. I was doing it because I was taught tough. I didn't show up every day, and I have days. I mean, I hardly have taken any sick days in the 21 years I've been here. And I had days I could have taken them. But like I said, it's not because I was tough. It was because I was taught tough. And I'm glad that I was taught tough. It helped me get through that year. And I'm glad also that the perspective that I was taught by my dad, that I can remember there was a time that year where it was at my birthday. So it had been like 9 years ago and 3 weeks. I had been really fed up with the job. And every morning I would stand down by the gym, by the pop machine, and I would tell every kid that walked by me good morning, and I would call them by name. Because at that time I had taught all the kids, and if they were a new student that year, I figured out what their name was, obviously, and I would call them by name. And every one of them, at some point, someone walked by, a staff member, somebody's like, how do you know everybody's name? I'm like, well, because I've taught most of them, and it meant something to me to look you in the eye and call you by your name. Well, around my birthday, one of those days I'd had it, and again, I couldn't stand the job. And I stood there and I didn't say good morning to anybody. I'm like, this doesn't matter anyway. Just being a baby, just being a huge baby. And I just stood there, and kids would walk by me and they would look at me, almost waiting for me to say it, like wanting me to say it, almost needing to hear it, because who knows what that kind of day they had had getting there. Much like walking into a hospital room to see your dad, and you don't know what kind of day and how awful that's been. And I stood there like the baby that I am, or was maybe, and didn't say good morning to a single person that day. I'd smile at them, and maybe if they said it first, I might reply, but I wasn't being myself and doing it my way. Coach Gensel had given out slips of paper to a number of kids on my birthday and told them if they wanted to write a note to me, wish me happy birthday, and tell me something that I had done for them or whatever. And the number of those notes that said something about telling them good morning when they needed it, and always reaching out and always being kind and whatever it was, just a multitude of very nice things. And man, when I read those things, it was all I could do at my desk to not start crying, because I thought, you big baby, how embarrassed should you be? Because you don't like what your job is, or you wish you weren't doing what you're doing. You weren't raised like that. You've watched your dad go through all this stuff, and this is what you're doing. This is the person that you've allowed yourself to become. From that day on, no matter what, same every day, went back to being the person, and have tried really hard to continue to do that. And even in the life that I'm living today, all these years later, when I tell you life is good, I mean it. No, everything's not perfect. I have friends that aren't doing well. I have a cousin whose husband had an accident recently and is doing better, but that's not good. There's many, many different things that are going on in life that aren't terrific. But you know what? being negative about stuff ain't going to make anything any better. And life is good, and you can battle through those things that maybe aren't, and you can. And I watched my dad do that. And I remember there was one little short stretch where it seemed like he was getting better. And I went to the farm after school to help out with something, and I couldn't find him. I didn't know where he was. And when I finally found him, he was on the tractor. He was doing something. He was was strong enough that he could be on the tractor doing some things, he and my mom. And it was like seeing Superman get his powers back for a little bit. And that was a good thing. And I'm sure he was able to even get to that point because he stayed positive and he was staying positive. You know, I can't believe that it's been 9 years and I miss him every day. But what I'm thankful for, and I used to, I'd pick up my phone and I'm going to text him or I'm going to call him. I need to know this or I need to know that. Some of that has gone away. Some of that is because I already know the answer and I already had the example. And thank God that I was blessed to have the best dad that anybody could ask for, and that my children were able to have the best grandpa that anybody could ask for. 9 years is a long, it seems like a long time. And at times it seems like this afternoon, when I got the news this afternoon, 9 years ago, it happened just yesterday. Make sure when you listen to something like this, and this is one of those things when I decided to do the podcast, it's like, I've said this before, who do you think you are? I don't know. Maybe you needed to hear this. Not because it came from me, but maybe you just needed to hear it. There's a lot of negative in the world that we live in. It's actually insane how negative people have gotten. Try to be positive. Count your blessings. Find things in your life to be thankful for. I guarantee you can find something. Just like kids walking down a hall, looking at you, hoping that you would say good morning, because that's just what they just needed. That maybe you're that person. Maybe you're the one saying that to somebody. Maybe you're giving someone a compliment because they're on their last, they're at their wits' end. They need it. And I wouldn't have believed that if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes and I hadn't lived it with how my dad was and the way he treated people and that perspective that I gained from that interesting, tough year 9 years ago. I appreciate you listening. I hope that if you did, it makes a difference and it gave you something that you needed at this time in your life. And if you just listen to it, enjoy it, I hope that maybe you can take and apply some of it to your own life. I'll be back with another episode soon. It'll be time for another music episode. I'm wanting to, along the lines of my dad, the thumbnail says my dad. I'm going to use some of these to tell some of my favorite lessons I learned from just simply the best guy you ever knew. Take care of yourself. And again, it really is. Life is good. See ya.